Deep inside your skull right now, there's a tiny bone, harder than any other bone in your body. It's called the petrous bone. It's where your inner ear sits. And that bone is holding a secret. For tens of thousands of years, bones like this one have sat buried in caves, in forgotten graves under layers of dirt, holding on to fragments of DNA without even knowing it, protected just enough to survive moisture, heat, time itself. And now, finally, we have the key to read them. And what we found changes everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Forget the nice story about one happy family that left Africa and peacefully colonized the planet. That's not what happened, not even close. You are the result of hundreds of thousands of years of fleeing, of extinctions, of forced mixing between different species, of entire peoples wiped almost completely off the face of the earth. Whatever's left of them is hiding, right now, inside you, as small percentages of DNA you never knew you were carrying. Think of your DNA like an old piece of parchment, the kind monks reused over and over. You write on it, then scrape it clean, then write something new on top, except the old ink never fully disappears. Shine ultraviolet light on it and the erased letters rise back up, layered underneath whatever was written more recently. Your body is exactly like that. A parchment rewritten dozens of times, erased by famine, by war, by ice, by migration, but never fully wiped clean. And now, finally, we have the right light to read what was erased. Let's see what it says. You've probably been told all humans come from a single African Eve, one starting point, one place, one moment. Nice, simple, easy to remember. Wrong. The reality is much stranger. Africa, 300,000 years ago, wasn't one tribe that grew and spread out. It was dozens of groups of people, living separately, thousands of kilometers apart, each evolving in its own direction, some taller, some more disease-resistant, some with slightly different brains, for tens of thousands of years, without even knowing the others existed. Only much later did they mix, and only from that mixing did what we now call Homo sapiens emerge. You don't have a cradle. You have an entire network of cradles spread across a massive continent, some connected, others cut off for years at a time by droughts and deserts that came and went. And at one point, our species nearly died out completely. The entire human population on the planet collapsed to just a few thousand individuals. A drought, maybe, or some disaster we'll probably never pin down exactly. Your genome right now still carries the scar of that moment, a suspiciously high genetic uniformity, a sign that we came within a hair's breadth of total extinction. But here's the stranger part. In the genomes of some people living in Nigeria today, the Yoruba, the Esan, and in Sierra Leone and the Gambia, there are genetic traces from a species of human we've never actually seen. No fossil, no tooth, no bone, nothing. Somewhere between 2% and 19% of their DNA comes from a population that split off our family tree nearly 1 million years ago and interbred with their ancestors tens of thousands of years ago. We don't know what they looked like. We don't know what they were called. We'll probably never know. They exist purely as a statistical trace, an invisible signal detected by computers comparing genomes. An entire human species that lived, reproduced, maybe loved, maybe died of hunger or disease or at someone else's hand, and vanished completely, leaving behind absolutely nothing except an equation hidden in the blood of their descendants today. Sit with that for a second. An entire human species, erased completely from history, and the only proof it ever existed is that you or someone else on this planet is still carrying it. You've probably heard this story too. 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, a group of humans crossed a narrow strait near the Red Sea and set out to colonize the world. One event, one door that opened once. Also wrong. We left Africa more than once, much earlier than we thought, at least 100,000 years ago, and every single time, climate gave us a brief window, a few thousand years when the Sahara Desert temporarily turned into green savanna with rivers and lakes. Whole groups walked out through those green corridors. They settled in Arabia, in the Levant. And almost every time when the climate flipped back, they died. They vanished without descendants, or they retreated back into Africa defeated. Archaeologists have found their tools. They're abandoned settlements, but genetically, they're ghosts. They exist in the soil, but not in us. Only one of these waves succeeded. Just one, roughly 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. And from that small group, maybe a few thousand people, every single person outside Africa today descends genetically. Europeans, Asians, Americans, Australians, all of them. Think about what that means for your own existence. You're here because, tens of thousands of years ago, a small group of people happened to hit exactly the right climate window, while dozens of other groups, just as brave, just as determined, vanished without a trace just a few thousand years earlier or later. You're not the product of a plan. You're the product of an extraordinary run of luck repeated generation after generation, for 60,000 years straight without a single break. If just one of your ancestors had died before having kids, somewhere along those thousands of generations, you wouldn't be here. Period. That lucky group that left Africa didn't walk into an empty world. Neanderthals had already been living in Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Sturdy, cold-adapted, brains just as big as ours, maybe even bigger. They weren't stupid like we used to think. They were perfectly suited to the place they lived in. And the story you know, we showed up, interbred a little, they died out, is wrong. Contact between us and them stretched across *200,000 years*. Not one event. Hundreds of thousands of years of repeated encounters, separations, isolation and reunion. Whole generations that met, split apart and found each other again. It wasn't a love story, but it wasn't just a war of extermination either. It was something messier and more disturbing. Repeated contact, sometimes peaceful, sometimes not, between two species that recognized each other enough to have children together, but not enough to live side by side for the long haul. And the way it happened tells us something dark. The genetics show a clear excess of Neanderthal men who reproduced with modern human women, not the other way around. Maybe that reflects an unequal power dynamic. Or maybe simpler and just as brutal hybrid males kept dying before they could have kids themselves, and natural selection wiped them almost completely out of the genome. Either way, it's not a romantic story. Now here's what that 2% of Neanderthal DNA actually means, if you're of European or Asian descent. It's not just a lab curiosity, it's something inside you right now. Ever tried to quit smoking and couldn't? There are at least *2 genes inherited directly from Neanderthals that raise your risk of nicotine addiction. The same genes have also been linked to drinking patterns and sleep. Part of your struggle with a bad habit might literally be an inheritance from a species that went extinct 40,000 years ago. Have you had severe COVID or know someone who did? A whole block of genes on chromosome 3, also inherited from Neanderthals, significantly raises that risk carried by roughly 1 in 6 Europeans and half the population of South Asia. Got allergies? Maybe. Your immune system stronger against bacteria and parasites because of those same ancient genes? Very possibly that too. Neanderthals didn't disappear. They got absorbed into us, piece by piece, and the pieces that helped us stuck around. Right now, while you're listening to this, you're probably carrying a habit, an allergy, or an immune response inherited from a species that hasn't existed for 40,000 years. Further east in Asia, there was a third relative of ours, one we know almost nothing about, because all we have of them is a pinky finger bone and a few teeth, found in a cave in Siberia. The Denisovans. And yet their genetic fingerprint is enormous. People in Papua New Guinea, in Australia, on Pacific Islands carry up to 46% Denisovan DNA, the highest percentage of archaic ancestry anywhere in the world. The absolute record belongs to a small group in the Philippines, with a percentage 30–40% higher than even Australians. But here's an even stranger story. One specific gene, called MUC19, traveled through an incredible chain of interbreeding, first Denisovans with Neanderthals, then those hybrids with modern humans, and ended up, thousands of kilometers later, carried by the first people who crossed into the Americas. There, it helped them adapt to new diseases and a completely new environment. Think about the journey of that single gene. Born in a species extinct for ages, passed down through interbreeding we have zero physical evidence of, carried across Siberia, over an ice bridge, all the way to America, and still alive today in people who have no idea they're carrying a piece of the genetic body of a species humanity only knows from one small finger bone. And at high altitude in Tibet, people today survive thin air more easily thanks to a gene also inherited from Denisovans, a gene that simply kept their ancestors alive where others would have died. We didn't replace these species, we absorbed them, and they died carrying us forward. While one group headed north, toward Europe, another turned east, following the coast of Asia, generation after generation. And somewhere along that road, something happened that seems almost impossible for the time. A group of people crossed open ocean, not a narrow strait, dozens, maybe hundreds of kilometers of water to reach a brand new continent, Australia. No maps, no compasses, probably no certainty there was even land beyond the horizon. Older estimates put this at 65,000 years ago. The most recent genetic analysis says 60,000 later than we thought, but still extraordinarily early. The DNA of Aboriginal Australians today shows a direct, unbroken link to those first navigators. One of the oldest continuous populations on the planet, almost completely isolated for tens of thousands of years, until Europeans arrived just a few centuries ago. This was probably the first deliberate sea voyage in the entire history of humanity, tens of thousands of years before the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, or anyone else you'd normally associate with ancient seafaring. Forget what you learned in school about your European people. You're not the descendant of one single population that lived in the same place for thousands of years. You're the result of three massive waves of migration, each one nearly wiping out the one before it. The first wave, hunter-gatherers, the people from the painted caves at Lascaux, the ones who survived the Ice Age by hiding out in Spain and the Balkans. Dark skin, blue eyes, a combination that looks strange to us today, but that's exactly what their DNA shows. They contribute about *20–30% of your genome if you're of European descent. The second wave, farmers who came from Anatolia 8,000 years ago. They didn't just teach the local population to farm. They replaced them almost completely in a matter of centuries. Their share is the biggest piece of you, *40–60%. The third wave, horsemen from the steppes near the Black Sea 5,000 years ago. The Yamnaya people, likely the linguistic ancestors of nearly every language spoken today from Iceland to India. Their contribution, *20–30%. And their arrival wasn't peaceful. In parts of northern Europe, the DNA of local men was nearly wiped out within a few centuries. Which brings us to something that sounds almost unbelievable, but it's true. About 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, while the number of women having children kept rising normally, the number of men leaving descendants suddenly, dramatically collapsed. The genetic pattern looks as if there was, at one point, only one man leaving descendants for every 17 women *. Why? Most likely, constant warfare between clans of related men. When one clan defeated another, the losing men were systematically wiped out. The women were absorbed into the winning clan. So forget the peaceful Neolithic, happy farmers who calmly taught the world to grow food. Genetically speaking, it was one of the most violent periods in the history of men. And if you think evolution stopped after all this migrating, not even close. The strongest evidence of recent natural selection in Europeans, the ability of an adult to drink a glass of milk without getting sick. The first European farmers were, like almost every other adult mammal on the planet, lactose intolerant. The gene that lets you drink milk today only emerged and spread in the last 4,000 to 7,000 years. And the reason wasn't gentle. During famines and droughts, people who could drink milk without violent dysentery and dehydration had an extra source of survival. Everyone else died more often, younger, with fewer kids. A glass of milk, something totally unremarkable on your breakfast table today, cost the lives of millions of people who didn't carry the right mutation. While Europe was being reshaped wave after wave, in the far northeastern corner of Asia, the most extraordinary story of all was about to unfold. At the peak of the last ice age, sea levels were over 100 meters lower than today. The seafloor between Siberia and Alaska rose to the surface, an entire land bridge, hundreds of kilometers wide. Beringia. The ancestors of Native Americans split genetically from their parent Asian population around 23,000 years ago. But they didn't move straight south. They got stuck there, between the ice of Siberia and the ice of North America, for maybe thousands of years, completely isolated, forming a population that didn't exist anywhere else on the planet. Think about that. Thousands of years, an entire group of people living in a kind of geographic limbo, trapped between two frozen worlds, with no way of knowing whether they'd ever be able to move on. When the ice finally retreated, 15,000 to 16,000 years ago, they were able to head south at last. Some went overland, through corridors opening up between glaciers. Others, maybe earlier, used simple boats along the coast, living off the sea, leaving behind traces we can no longer find today, because they're underwater, swallowed by the same rising oceans that once let their ancestors cross on dry land. The genetic makeup of these people was itself a mix, 60–70% East Asian ancestry, 30–40% from a deep Siberian root, the same root that, in parallel, would go on to produce the Yamnaya horsemen who'd reshape Europe thousands of years later. There's an invisible genetic thread linking the steppe where the Yamnaya expansion began to the ice that the first people crossed into America. And from there, the journey kept going. Over *20,000 kilometers on foot, from northern Asia all the way to the southern tip of South America, to Tierra del Fuego, the longest prehistoric migration ever documented in the history of our species. Tens of thousands of years, generation after generation, moving further and further south. And with every generation that split off from the parent group and kept moving, they carried less and less of the original genetic baggage with them. A kind of slow erosion, repeated dozens of times across the entire continent, which is why indigenous populations at the southern tip of the Americas today have lower immune genetic diversity than those in the north. The price of a 20,000-kilometer journey paid generations later. And then, one final detail that closes the loop. Beringia sank back under the ocean about 11,000 years ago. The bridge an entire world had crossed on disappeared. America stayed cut off from the rest of the world for thousands of years. The journey didn't end at Tierra del Fuego. Genetics is now uncovering internal migrations all across Latin America that we knew nothing about from archaeology, peoples who moved, mixed, and split apart again, long after that first great crossing from Beringia. And in the southern part of the continent, in what's now Argentina and Uruguay, evidence shows populations far more mobile than we assumed, even thousands of years after their ancestors first arrived. So here's where we've ended up. Every human alive today, no matter the continent, the skin color, the language they speak, carries layer after layer of migration, conquest, mixing, and extinction. You carry genes from Neanderthals who no longer exist. You carry genes from Denisovans we've never seen whole, known only from a finger bone and a few teeth. You carry the fingerprint of entire African populations, developed separately for tens of thousands of years, slowly absorbed into one another before any of them ever left the continent. There is no pure people. There never was. Your genetic identity isn't a straight line. It's a parchment rewritten dozens of times, erased by climate, by famine, by war, but never fully wiped clean. The old layers always rise back up, under the right light, laid over everything you thought you knew about yourself. Maybe that's why the fascination with where we come from never fades. We're not just looking for our origins. We're looking for proof that, through all this chaos, migrations, failed waves, silent wars, extinctions, something survived from every single one of them. A fragment, a small percentage, a gene passed down through a chain of chance events that could just as easily have broken somewhere along the way. And it survived. It's right there in the bone behind your ear.